Hello. All right, today we're going to talk about a number of different things regarding ancient Greek theater and culture, specifically that are related to your upcoming reading of the play Medea, which you've read before in one context, and we're going to sort of look at it in a very different context here as a document of what the ancient Greeks thought or didn't think about things. So a couple different aspects that I want to talk about. One of the things is because we're reading ancient Greek theater, and occasionally we see pictures of things, I do want to constantly be thinking of what the physical contexts were in which ancient Greek theater was produced. That is, as best we can know, we're not going to get too deep into that argument, but as best we can know, what did the actual thing look like, and what did that appearance and environment do to the people who were seeing it? If you go sit down in university theater, there are certain things about the environment that will impact how you view the production. Who are you sitting next to? How far can you see? What does the set design look like? What do the costumes look like? All sorts of things. So I want to touch on a couple of physical contexts of the ancient Greek theater that maybe sometimes we forget about. The first one, we've talked about this in a couple of different regards. It is fundamentally anti-realistic or representational. Certainly one tiny little example of how it is deliberately anti-realistic is the constant use of masks. You can't be realistic in a mask because, normal people's faces move, and masks don't have moving faces. There are a handful of other anti-realistic modes of storytelling that are key to ancient Greek theater that I want to make sure that you understand. So this would be an opportunity for possibly an annotation to say, here's one. The way in which ancient Greek theater doesn't even attempt to represent real life. In addition to that anti-realistic storytelling style, we also have this notion that the Greek theater is outdoors. Most of the theater we do nowadays is obviously indoors, which means that it doesn't matter what the weather is outside, it doesn't matter what time of day it is, it doesn't even really matter what season it is. All that matters currently in contemporary theater is how good the HVAC is so we can control the heat and cool, and then what kind of technology we can put up. Imagine the city Dionysia takes place in March. Things can be a little bit, relatively speaking, chilly in Greece in March. The weather can be a little bit unexpectedly, for instance, as you see pictured here, foggy or rainy or whatever. So we've got people who get up in the morning and go to the theater. And remember, with the city Dionysia, we're spending a day at the theater, drinking all day and enjoying a trilogy of shows and a whole bunch of other entertainments. So we are outdoors and subject to the weather. Imagine, for example, somebody standing on that stage saying, "Wow, it is so dark out here. It is the middle of the night and it's high noon and there isn't fog." We are clearly at a place where the audience's imagination has to take over for the realism, or lack thereof, that's inherent to the production. We are not only just simply outside, ancient Greek theaters are built in amazing places, partially because the Greeks didn't have a common and pervasive use of the arch like the Romans did. Ancient Greek theaters mainly had to be built into hillsides. So anytime you got to build a theater into a hillside, you're going to probably have some kind of pretty interesting vista. And so there are just a couple of different locations that I want to show you of ancient Greek theaters that give a spectacular notion of the concept of the broad, vast landscape, the ocean, the mountains, the far horizon. And we need to remind ourselves that in these large theaters that are outdoors, people looked kind of tiny way down there. And what looked big and imposing and powerful and possibly even menacing was the landscape. And this is the same landscape over which foreign and local invaders will come to any town in ancient Greece, right? Athens is the one we're focusing on. People might come right over that hill and sack and burn Athens and kill and rape and cause all kinds of trouble. It's also the notion of the beauty of the landscape, certainly. And that's a big part of it. But regardless, right, what I would argue is that we've got this anti-realistic theater that takes place outside, so it's not really up to us how the weather goes on a given day. And then if we're in nature and we're surrounded by the giant, enormous landscape that we, in the ancient Greek world, have a limited control over, have a limited understanding of, one of the things that physical context does is remind us as individuals, as individual ancient Greek audience members, damn, I am not very important. I'm pretty small compared to the landscape. I can't control the weather. And my actual literal everyday life is not being realistically represented on the stage. So just kind of keep that in mind as you read Medea and think about it, and perhaps consider the ways in which this landscape might have an impact on an individual audience member. We've talked about a handful of different ways, but perhaps you can add something to it. And then as you read Medea, don't just think of it as a play written down on paper. Think of what it might look like in its original context and how you, the audience member, might feel about the different themes and ideas of the show if those themes and ideas are backed up by this vast, broad landscape, if those vast themes and ideas are complicated by the notion of weather. Just something to keep in mind. All right. The next important thing we need to talk about is how Athens viewed and treated foreigners. Remember, Medea is a foreigner. So her treatment, and I recognize, right, this play doesn't take place in Athens, but it does take place in an idea of Athens. And the Athenians are kind of examining how foreigners do and don't fit into Greek culture. Certainly Euripides is examining that. So let's think about how Athenians treated foreigners. Not surprisingly, the Greeks, and Athens in particular, look around the rest of the world and see that there's not a lot else going on, and they decide that to be Athenian is an inherently superior position. So if you are born Greek, specifically if you are born Athenian, there is something inherently superior to that position. So there is, at the heart of being an Athenian, an inherent xenophobia, a fear of foreigners, a disdain for foreigners, and there are a couple of different ways in which that fear is developed and a couple of ways in which that fear manifests itself in Greek culture. One of the things that develops a significant fear of foreigners is the Persian invasions. This is a series of conflicts, multiple battles, multiple locations, different alliances between the different Greek city-states that takes place for, as you can see there, from 492 to 450 BCE. That is a long time to have a marauding army from Persia, or roughly Iran in contemporary terms, right, wandering about the Greek peninsula and getting in a whole lot of battles. Athens in particular was conquered and burned in 480. And let's be clear, in this era, especially with the Persians, when your city is conquered and burned, it's the worst possible thing that can happen to you, right? We are walking through the streets killing infants with swords. We were raping women. Like, there are some huge, huge disastrous impacts to your city being sacked and burned. Finally, the Greek city-states get together and, as you see in 450, expel the Persians. Nonetheless, this certainly does not make Greeks in general, and Athenians in particular, exactly loving of foreigners, especially Persian or foreigners. Those are dark-skinned people, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So one of the things the Persian invasions eventually do is give rise to this stereotype that some foreigners are in fact what we would call barbarians. And there are all sorts of different places that this notion of barbarian crops up in Greek storytelling and Greek culture. Generally speaking, barbarian as a term indicates some level of savagery on the part of somebody who is not Greek. The story of Odysseus fighting the Cyclops, if you know that part of the Odyssey, is a hugely important story in terms of seeing the Cyclops as somebody who looks different from us, who's from far away, who is savage, right? He eats people, and who is, in the end, not as smart as Athenians, right? Odysseus, as you see in this handy little pottery here, kills him. They end up not killing him. They stab his eye out and leave him crying and leave him behind. So, but there is a savageness that is inherent to this foreign stereotype of a barbarian. The other important thing, and here I've brought an image in of Xerxes from the movie 300. All right, here is a stereotypical notion of, and this is very exaggerated and stylized for modern times, but a Persian invader is somebody, and a barbarian, generally speaking, is somebody with dark skin. And along with the stereotype of dark skin, and we're talking about the roots of contemporary racism. We still have in the world today serious problems with white people fearing dark-skinned people. And the foreignness and the exotic nature, you can see what they did with Xerxes in the movie with all the piercings, right? And this really unusual costume and the fear of the faraway. So barbarians are people who aren't as smart as Athenians, but who do tend to be more savage and more deadly and more dangerous. Uncivilized is an overall word that we might consider for these things, right? And there is also, as there was a little bit with the Persians in the stories and histories of ancient Greece, there is also an association with the barbarian nature. There's an association with magical powers. And here we have our main character in the play, for God's sake, riding away on a chariot pulled by dragons. And so there is magic associated with some of this, right? I mean, and again, we're drawing on really old, familiar Western stereotypes of, voodoo culture, for example, and the fear that voodoo culture has some kind of black magic that civilized Christian white culture is afraid of and doesn't know and can't understand. And these really problematic racial lines have been drawn for a long, long time. And you see here the way Athenians treated dark-skinned foreigners. There are the roots of a lot of those ideas. So some foreigners are barbarians. Other foreigners, particularly ones who look more like the Greek people, and here we're talking about people from Italy and from mainland Europe and from even like the Middle East to a certain degree and North Africa to a certain degree. If they are quote-unquote civilized foreigners, they are owed this concept of xenoi. And xenoi just simply means that when foreigners and strangers come to visit Athens, they are owed, and this is a religious duty, they are owed hospitality. Hi, welcome to Athens. You're here to visit. That's fantastic. We're going to take really good care of you and spend money on showing you how great Athens is, and we're going to be very courteous and hospitable. And that notion of xenoi is a really key part of what it means to be Greek. So there's this fantastic contradiction here that is usually resolved by looking at the skin color of the foreigner, right? Dark-skinned foreigners, barbarians, scary. Foreigners with similar colored skin to the Greeks, all right, we'll be fine. We will extend xenoi to you. It also helps if you are a foreign trader and are bringing money into Athens. That it will also get xenoi extended to you, no doubt about it, because everybody likes money. So the other key, though, about xenoi is that, hi, welcome, do your business. We're going to take care of you. We'll, exchange money, make trading deals. And then when you're done, you just go ahead and move on. And so part of xenoi is an understanding that a foreigner will visit, and if you treat them nicely, that's good, but then that foreigner does need to move on. There's another category of foreigner called metic, and a metic is very simply a foreigner who, for whatever reason, has worked their way into Athenian society by being a very valuable trading partner or a number of other things, and metics are occasionally granted full citizenship. And it's something that really sort of ebbs and flows depending on what era of ancient Greece you're talking about. Sometimes the Greeks will sort of get up in a roar and get pissed off at all the metics and kick them off the citizenship rolls so they won't be allowed to vote. And then later on, everything will calm down a little bit, and whatever fervor that developed will fade into the past, and they'll let the metics back on the citizenship rolls and they can vote. Generally speaking, metics are either wealthy foreigners who are trading, or they're wealthy foreigners who have come to Greece to be educated. They're still kind of seen as second-class citizens, but they are nonetheless a notable portion of Athenian society. Here's a nice visualization of what the Athenian social pyramid was like. So we've got 43,000 at the top, adult male citizens. Those are the most important people, right? They're at the top of the pyramid. Women and children are secondary in terms of status and class and importance underneath the citizens. The metics are underneath that, 26,000 foreigners at any given time in Athens. Then look down there at the bottom, we have 115,000 slaves, which is a awful damn lot of slaves, and we'll talk about that later. So keep in mind that Medea enters into a Greek world in which the people who live in that world, Jason in particular, her husband, but also the other characters in this play, believe that they are superior to everyone else. She is from, keep an eye out in the play. Where is Medea from? I want you to make sure you understand that, because this decides the way that she is perceived by the rest of the people in the play. Is she a barbarian? Does she act like one? Does she meet those expectations? Is she offered xenoi as is appropriate? Does she possibly have the opportunity to become a metic and earn citizenship? Essentially, how does her status as a foreigner explain how she's acted upon in the play, but also what she does in the play? And then this is the second part. How would the Greek audience have perceived her? I'm sitting in this audience and I'm watching Medea go through the play and do the things she does. Does this support my notion of foreigners as, say, barbarians, or as foreigners as deserving of xenoi? Or does it complicate or undermine those notions? And after you've read the play, maybe come back here and make a little annotation and we can sort of consider some ideas about that.